Chapter the 7th. Soberly and impeccably clad in a gray broadcloth suit with a black mourning band around one sleeve, he posed in the doorway much as he must have posed for the portrait in the great hall. Even minus his military regalia, I recognized him at once, and acknowledged him to be nigh on swoonably handsome. Yet I did not much like the way he coolly looked me up and down, although I suppose it was to be expected. After all, I was a stranger invading his home. After his pause, he crossed the short distance between us. "Miss Ermintrude Basilweather?" I arose, but rather than curtsying, I offered him my gloved hand to shake. I wanted to put him off balance a bit, but it was he who unbalanced me. Taking my outstretched hand in his, he bowed over it and kissed it. Hastily I withdrew it, feeling the heat of a rosy blush in my face. "My lord," I twittered, for my voice had shot up an octave or two and my knees folded without my permission, seating me in my chair. "Let us have some light in here," he said, sounding impatient with the funeral gloom. He lit the table lamp, then sat across from me. "Please, Miss Basilweather, do tell me what adventure has befallen you to disorder your charming clothing." I heard no mockery in his voice, so why not? I told him my tale nearly in full, omitting only my actual intentions and my encounter with Sherlock. I intended to amuse the Earl, and I did. He smiled at my description of side whiskers, grinned when I told him how Jessie had jettisoned me in front of the pub, and chuckled over my contretemps with the innkeeper. If he were not constrained by being in mourning, I think he would have laughed out loud. Yet I think only decorum, not grief, restrained him. While talking, I had been watching his dark eyes nearly as black as his hair, and fascinating eyes they were. Intelligent, lustrous, large, widely spaced over high cheekbones. His portrait did not do justice to the curious gleam I sometimes glimpsed in them. I think no painter could. Outwardly, the Earl of Dunhench, impeccably correct, crisp of collar, and smiling of face, looked like a paragon of civilized good taste. But something in the glint of his eyes hinted otherwise. That, and something in his manner, some exceeding force of self. As I explained how I had arrived at Dunhench Hall and began to apologize for my intrusion, he interrupted. "Of course you must stop here for as long as you like. What else are you to do? But I quite forbid you to wear black. You are the only bright and interesting object I have seen in days. I will instruct Dawson to take the greatest good care of you." He stood up, bowed, and left the room before I could get my mouth open to speak. The good Dawson commenced her care of me by leading me on a grand tour of Dunhench Hall, omitting nothing except, of course, the back stairs, haunts of the servants. But morning room, main parlor, dining room, drawing room, more accurately withdrawing room, where ladies could go to get away from cigar smoke, music room, its piano closed and draped with crape, billiard room, gun room, and library all were shown to me, and I made sure to smile, gaze, gasp, and exclaim as if I had never in my life seen any home so grand. Dunhench Hall really was in a class of its own in regard to elk antlers sprouting from the scagliola walls and bearskins on the parquet floors. But for me, the best was yet to come. We went up to the rose-carpeted front stairs and into a moist, heavenly-scented, glass-roofed conservatory, flooded with sunlight. I suppose a greenhouse is exempt from being draped with crape. Off of which opened a private parlor where, I suppose, Lord and Lady Redcliffe could enjoy the orchids in comfort. On the walls of this pleasant room hung a number of light and airy watercolor paintings, quite a relief to my eyes after the dark and dour oil portraits downstairs. "Oh, I love watercolors," I exclaimed quite truthfully, admiring each in turn. Child with a puppy, boat beneath a willow, girl in a rose garden, woman reading, cat in a window. Terribly conventional subjects, yet beautifully done with grace of line and an unfailing eye for composition. "Who painted these?" I cried, failing to find a signature on any of them. "Why, Lady Dunhench did, Miss Basilweather." Dawson sounded subdued, mentioning the recently dear departed. "Quite the artist she was. Shall we go on? I believe you will like the way the guest accommodations have been arranged." I responded with the requisite enthusiasm, and we worked our way down a long corridor of bedrooms decorated and designated according to all the hues of the rainbow, although the red bedroom was called the poppy room, the orange one was apricot, etc. All were indeed marvels to behold if one fancied such a close conspiracy of the same color in different patterns for walls, floors, drapes, lamps, and bed covers. "Which one would you prefer to have, dear? Miss Basilweather?" "Oh, I cannot possibly make up my mind." "We'll put you in the fern room, to match your dress." "I quite like green," I acknowledged, "but this dress is ruined." "Not at all, dear. I mean, Miss Basilweather. We can replace that overskirt in 2 shakes of a little lamb's tail." Solicitously, she took me by the elbow, propelling me down the corridor, then plied a key from the ring of them she carried on her belt, letting me into yet another room, or suite of rooms. Boudoir, dressing room, bedroom, decorated with exquisite taste in a range of soothing colors: peach, ecru, soft pink, cream, pale yellow, white. I saw delicate ladies' chairs, carved but with upholstered circular backs and seats, a couch that curved around a circular ottoman, lacy handmade lampshades. Over the dressing table hung a circular mirror framed in golden scallops. A remarkable white bedstead seemed designed to cup the sleeper almost like a boat. Even the wardrobes were painted white. Dawson bustled to the wardrobes and opened them, but I stood still, my gaze fixed upon a large watercolor supported by an easel as if it had just been finished. "Are these Lady Dunhench's rooms?" I asked, feeling a bit peculiar at the thought, my voice sinking to a whisper as if I might disturb a ghost. "Yes, Miss Basilweather." Dawson plucked garments from the wardrobe. "And she painted this watercolor?" "Yes, miss." Indeed, Lady Felicity's boudoir might better have been termed a studio, for it was fitted out with tables, baskets, and Lazy Susans full of supplies. But the painting I was studying seemed oddly unlike any of the others I had seen of hers. It depicted a woman in a russet habit riding a bay horse, with a cottage and woods in the background. But the composition was dreadful. The horse's nose nearly exited the left-hand side of the painting, leading the viewer's eye outward and away. Quite an elementary mistake. Nor did the painter seem interested in what a horse looked like, or a cottage. Both were crudely done. And the background was filled with woods, flat and monotonous. Why not a hill or two, some distant sheep, a vista? Even the trees of the woods looked clumsy, with straight limbs jutting at odd angles instead of forming graceful curves. I frowned, trying to make excuses for the talented Lady Felicity. "Was this done a long time ago?" I asked Dawson. Arms loaded with clothing, she turned towards me. "That? No, the paint's hardly dry on that, miss. She did it the day she—" Dawson choked, failing to finish her sentence, and hustled past me without looking at the painting, seeming suddenly in a great hurry to exit the unfortunate lady's chambers. "This way, miss," she directed me, her voice quivering. Following her out of the door, I finally realized her intention. "Surely you cannot expect me to wear the clothing of your so misfortunately expired mistress." "Why not, dearie? What does she need them for now?" Dawson sounded unwontedly familiar. More, she sounded, although quite calm, a bit hysterical. "But I am quite tall, you know. It won't matter. Nothing matters." More than a bit hysterical. I judged it best to be silent, trailing after her to the fern room, following like a good donkey where I was led. But my mind had taken off, galloping in several directions. Dawson had a footman bring up my carpet bag and parasol, and sent for a maid named Jill. Listening to Dawson give Jill some rather alarming instructions, I bent over so that neither would see what I was doing, slipped my dagger out of my corset, and hid it deep in my carpet bag, firmly and silently assuring myself that it was unlikely Jill would discover that my bosom was filled with papers, pound notes, and other supplies. All should now be well. Dawson helped me out of my green dress while Jill hung up my spare dress, a ruched nankeen frock, declaring it charming but not formal enough for dinner. Then, while Dawson set to work with scissors, needle, and thread, replacing my ripped overskirt with a similar one borrowed from one of the purloined gowns, Jill took on the challenge of making me presentable to dine with the Earl, trying Flossie's evening gowns on me. Although they accommodated my girth, they were, as I had predicted, too short for me, and ways had not to be found around this difficulty. During these hours of sewing and fitting, it was quite natural for the housekeeper, the maid, and me to talk about fashion, and by complimenting Lady Felicity's wardrobe, I devised ways to ask questions about her. Jill and Dawson willingly and warmly spoke of her as a ray of sunshine, a songbird, and a blessed angel. Gently pressing them to be a bit more specific, I learned that Felicity liked to arrange flowers, drive her pony phaeton around the park, and create fancy boxes out of seashells and the like. I learned that she preferred boysenberry jam on her breakfast scones, disliked kidneys, whether or not they were served with beans, and adored ice cream. But as for details of her final illness and sad departure from this mortal realm, I could learn none. On that topic, the housekeeper and the maid were as indefinite as if we spoke of an imaginary person. Most perplexing. Nor could I blame their vagueness on stupidity, for both showed evidence of intelligence. Jill, for instance, made some of Flossie's gowns work on me by adding lace-up waists to cover that problem area. As for length, fashions had recently changed so much that skirts could now stop just below the ankle instead of dragging on the ground. So all was well in that regard, although sweeping hemlines had to be straightened. Finally, Jill costumed me to her satisfaction in a wine-red, frothy confection that bared my arms and collarbone. Then she placed a filmy combing wrapper around my shoulders and began to address the problem of my wayward tresses. I continued efforts to converse, turning the talk to Lord Cadogan. Was he a master with foibles and failings? But I learned little. After brushing my hair 100 strokes in the hope of civilizing it, Jill subdued it sufficiently to coil it atop my head, securing it there with an army of metal clips and pins. Into my coif's intricacies, she poked pink silk roses to match the pink velvet waist concealing the muddle in the middle of the dress, like a cummerbund. After removing the combing wrapper, she looked me over and declared me ravishing, but asked whether I wanted my face and arms dusted with rice powder. I declined. Both she and Dawson declared me pretty as a picture and said it was a pity I could not see myself, as all the looking-glasses were shrouded. Silently, I begged to differ. No one had draped the mirror in Lady Felicity's bedchamber. Then, bobbing, both Dawson and Jill allowed themselves to be dismissed, leaving me to myself and my own thoughts. Those thoughts were various and disturbing, so much so that I extracted paper and pencil from my fussy wine-red bosom in order to write them down. I wrote, "If Flossie expired due to such a virulent disease that her body had to be cremated, why is her bedroom not closed off, quarantined, fumigated? Why is the mirror in her room, and only her room, not draped with black? Why does her last watercolor look so odd? Why are Dawson and Jill so willing to dress me up in their late mistress's clothes? Why are they so vague about her demise? Why has the Earl invited me to dine? He should be in deep mourning. How am I to let Sherlock know where I am?" Even after I hid this list in my wine-red bodice, my thoughts continued so restlessly that I could not abide the battling green decor of my bedroom any more. Exiting, I wandered downstairs, found my way to the parlor with the pedestal table, and sat at it. As on every pedestal table in most parlors in England, there were displayed a redoubtable Bible, a Grecian goddess gracefully holding a plate for the collection of calling cards, a vase of flowers, several small photographs in freestanding oval frames, and a silver salver bearing the afternoon post. Topmost among the letters lay one with a typewritten address. Eyeing it curiously, I found that I recognized the return address, also typewritten. It was the letter Tish had said she would write to Caddy. Exercising some mental discipline, as I had no good excuse if I were caught rifling through the mail, I turned my attention elsewhere. On this particular pedestal table lay a sizable item that scarcely looked like a book, for its ornate intaglio velvet covers puffed like upholstery. But when I picked up this peculiar cushiony thing, it opened in the middle, and I found myself gawking at photograph after photograph mounted by means of decorative cardboard corners upon thick black paper. Such was my first experience of a photograph album, and a fine one it was, beginning with smeared and blotched, silvery daguerreotypes that had to date back to the beginning of photography, nearly 50 years ago. They represented Larimer Trask Rudcliffe, 5th Earl of Dunhench, and his wife, Olga Thorpe Rudcliffe. After lighting a lamp so that I could see more properly, I skipped over several generations of Rudcliffes to study the more recent, sepia-toned likenesses, looking for my host, Cadogan Burr Rudcliffe, No. 2. And there he was, in the requisite wedding photograph, the lady being his first wife, Mizella Haskell Rudcliffe, so labeled. She wore a great deal of white and seemed a bit smothered in point lace and orange blossoms. He wore a top hat and tails in which he somehow managed to look jaunty despite the need to maintain a pose for a full minute. The next photograph was a death portrait of Cadogan Burr Rudcliffe I, presumably Caddy's father, laid out in a casket so fine it might as well have been a sarcophagus. Death portrait followed death portrait. Cadogan Burr Rudcliffe III, who must have been Caddy's son, dead and swaddled in white at the age of 2.5. Then an old female Rudcliffe, rather grand, who was perhaps Caddy's mother. Then a little girl, Angelica Mizella Rudcliffe, surely his daughter, who had lived to be 3 before succumbing to diphtheria, and being laid out in white ruffles and lace. But then came another wedding portrait in which Cadogan Burr Rudcliffe II stood tall beside Felicity Glover Rudcliffe, a.k.a. Flossie. I recognized her at once, for she looked just like her twin, Letitia Glover, my client, although more feminized in her traditional white gown, cascades of lace, and a crown of rosebuds on her head to hold her veil. More black pages remained to be filled, but that was the last photograph in the album. I closed it thoughtfully. I had seen no death portrait of Flossie. Even more telling, I had seen none of Caddy's first wife, Mizella. This fact disturbed me greatly.